This is the Sports and Society podcast, where we go beyond scores, statistics, and personalities to focus on issues and controversies in sports worlds. Your hosts, Jake Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca, are sports sociologists and the authors of the book, Sports and Society, Issues and Controversies. The episodes in this podcast give you a behind-the-scenes look at the textbook with stories from our lives as scholars and athletes, as well as providing analysis of ongoing issues and controversies in contemporary sport worlds. We welcome hearing your thoughts and analysis, so please use this space to engage with us about the textbook or any of the topics we cover in this podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sports and Society podcast. Your hosts are Jake Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca. Hey, Jay.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be with you this morning and with our special guest.
Yeah, absolutely. So this episode is going to focus on the experience of Black athletes in college sports. And we're going to talk about this with Tracy Canada, who recently published an amazing book on Black football players. This episode directly addresses Chapter 8 on race and ethnicity, but also Chapter 9 on social class, Chapter 11 on sports, the sports economy, and then, of course, Chapter 14 on school sports. So our guest, Tracy Canada, is a sociocultural anthropologist whose ethnographic research uses sports to theorize race, kinship and care, gender, and the performing body. Her research focuses on the lived experience of Black football players, which led to her book, Tackling the Everyday, Race and Nation in Big-Time College Football, which I had the honor of reviewing, and it was fantastic. Dr. Canada absolutely. No, thank you. Dr. Canada is an assistant professor of cultural anthropology at Duke University with secondary appointments in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies, and African and African American studies. Tracy, welcome to our podcast.
Thank y'all so much for having me. And Jeff, I haven't been able to tell you thanks for the review yet, but I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to write that review of my book. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I really enjoyed reading your book, but I'm biased towards research on football. So
yeah,
there's that too. Okay,
understandable.
Yeah. So why don't we jump in with our first two questions we ask all of our guests. So the first question, Tracy, is if you could talk about your sort of like biography in sports, your experience in sports.
Yeah, I love answering this question because I think people are so surprised with why I ended up writing a book about football because I'm not a sports fan, actually. I didn't play sports growing up. I didn't watch sports growing up. I was a competitive dancer, so I do think that actually counts, but it is a sport in a completely different way. But my introduction to sports actually was through Duke University, which is where I'm a professor now, but I was an undergrad at Duke, and I'm from North Carolina. And so I knew about Duke because of basketball. It would always be on TV. I'm from Greensboro, and that's where the ACC used to be housed. And so during March Madness, like they would roll out the big TVs and we would watch them during school so we could watch the games. And Duke always did really well when I was in high school. And so that's how I found out about the school. That's kind of how I found out about a sport that seemed really fun to watch because the school that I was supporting was winning a lot. And so then when I ended up going to Duke, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to go to all the basketball games. Like, I'm going to love it, just like I did before. And I realized that you have to sleep outside to go to these games because the lines are so long. And I was like, oh, no, never mind. Like, I don't want to do that. So I think I went to maybe two basketball games my first year at Duke as an undergrad, and then I was done. But what did end up happening is that I was introduced to the football team because of the dorm that I lived in. And so I ended up meeting a lot of the guys that were first year students on the football team my year because of how housing works at Duke. And that was my introduction to football. I was not, I like I said, I kind of followed basketball before because of watching the games, but I had no understanding at all of what football was, what the sport, anything like that. Like that was my first introduction to it was becoming friends with the football team the year that I started. And so then that was my entry point into, okay, like what are they doing at these games? Who are their friends? What are the other sports that are even on campus? What do I have access to as a student? Because Duke students can go to games for free. So I would start to go to a couple of the games that way. But I never played. I didn't play anything in college. I didn't play anything in high school, and I stopped dancing when I went to college too. So I was very much just a spectator. And that got my brain thinking actually, like once I started to get into anthropology as an undergrad.
Cool. Well, you anticipated our second question, which is
Yeah,
how
a
does
little
your
bit.
experience in sports, lead to the scholarship you do? And yeah, and that's really clear.
Yeah. Because and it's not even that. I think for a very long time they were still very separate in my mind, right? Of like this is this thing that my friends were doing, and then I was like taking classes, right? Like it wasn't something that I thought to really put together until it became very clear that it made sense to put them together. Of like, oh, how can I analyze this thing that I'm starting to kind of anecdotally notice things about, right? And so very early on, it was just like little local things, right? Because I was friends with the people on the team, with the football players on the team, and I am much smaller, weigh a lot less, like have a very different body type than the football players. When I would walk around campus with them, people would look at us like they thought that we looked funny walking together because the guys were so much bigger than me and they were so much taller. That I would see how people would interact to the football players, which was completely different than how they would interact with me, right? And even though we were both, like if it was me and like one other player, we were both Black students on Duke's campus, they received a completely different treatment than I did, right? And so it was something about being a woman. It was something about not being a scholarship athlete on campus. It was something about not being specifically a football player that was leading to the ways that they were being interacted with by other students, by other professors. And so that became really interesting to me. And then when I was introduced to anthropology as an undergrad, which is also something that I had no idea about until I went to college, um, I started to ask questions. Like the questions that I was asking in my anthropology classes started to make a lot of sense as I was looking around like my life, just things that I was going through, and the football players and the football team. And I also ended up working in recruiting in football. So like the things that I was doing were starting to make a lot more sense to me as I was asking these like kind of critical questions through anthropology. And so then that's how they came together. But it was, I think, in a very serendipitous way. Also, the fact that I've like returned to Duke now, and so a lot of the people that introduced me to anthropology, introduced me to thinking about anthropology, they're still there. It was a really interesting coming together of things that allowed for me to do what it is that I'm doing now.
That's so cool. Hey, I want to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask later, but since you're talking, I didn't realize that you went to Duke and you
Yeah,
knew football players as a student.
yeah,
Can you talk about, because I worked in the student athletic center
yeah,
when I was in grad school, just so I could
yeah.
get to know athletes. And at USC, Tailback University, all I worked with was football players.
Hmm.
Can you talk about that experience of coming to a campus? I don't know Duke well, but I assume it's a
Hmm.
PWI,
Hmm.
a primarily white institution for Black athletes to, as football players especially, to come onto a campus, a private university like Duke. What
Hmm.
is that? What are they going through in their first year? What are the kind of the issues that they have to adjust to? What are the pressures that they're experiencing?
Yeah, and even to your point from before, what I like to call the types of universities that I have spent time at research wise, but also the types of universities that I've been a student at, right? Like I was an undergrad at Duke and I went to UVA for grad school. And my first job before I came back to Duke was at Notre Dame. So I've had experience at lots of different universities, but they're all kind of the same. And the way that I also say is that they are universities that have huge college athletics programs, right? It could be they're focusing on different sports, but they definitely care a lot about college sports. And they're historically white institutions, right? So in the same way that we call historically Black institutions HBCUs, I call these historically white because for a very long time they didn't admit Black students, and I think that that's an important note, especially for what it is that I do with my work, right? Um, and so as an undergrad, I think that again, there were things that like anecdotally I could pick up on. And part of it was because I was also a student at the same time, right? So if you were a Black student on a campus like Duke's campus as an undergrad, and you're looking at the numbers, like the demographic numbers, just of how many Black students there are there, how many Asian students there are on campus, how many white students there are on campus, how many Latino students are on campus, how many Native students are on campus, right? Like, so if we're just thinking demographically, I think at the time that I was an undergrad, I think it might have been like 8% of undergraduates were Black students, right? And then if you're looking more closely at the athletic teams there, and Duke, of course, is known as a basketball school more than it is a football school. So you're looking at the basketball, men's and women's basketball teams and the football team, and you're noticing that the demographic percentage is way higher than 8% for the Black students that are on those teams. First of all, like right out the gate, there's something going on there, right? When like almost 60% of these teams can be Black students, but 8% of the undergraduate student body is Black students, right? So there's something that's going on there where they're severely overrepresented on their teams and then also underrepresented in classrooms. And what that tangibly meant, that I was noticing as a student, because in a way I was going through the same thing, but then as I started to think about it research wise, and then, you know, like as a researcher, as an ethnographer, as an anthropologist, this became like the thing that I now do, is okay, like what does that mean for the person who has to navigate that, right? It means that if you're on a football team, specifically at a school like Duke, or sometimes at a school like Notre Dame too, definitely, there are assumptions about how you got to that school, right? The assumption is that you are not smart enough to be here. The only way that you got here is because you played football, right? Which is going to then, of course, affect the way that students interact with them, the ways that professors kind of side-eye them in class when they, let's say that, I remember this would happen all the time when I was in class, and also it happens sometimes now as a professor. Students will come, football players will come late to class because they're coming from practice. Excuse me. So if you have an early class, one, there's certain classes that they can't take because their practice schedule limits the classes that they're able to take. But two, they might come a little bit late because they're coming from practice. I have a colleague named Oren Starn who says that a student will never miss a football game for a class, but they can always miss a class for a football game, right? It's like there's this idea that you can be late to class, but you can't be late to practice. So they'll show up, they'll be super tired. They've also just like gone through these like long workouts. Maybe they haven't eaten yet. And the fact that they're tired means that sometimes they'll fall asleep in class. You know? And so then there's this assumption that the professor is looking at them of like, oh, you don't care. Oh, you're not invested in this. It's like, no, I've actually been awake since 5 o'clock, and your class at 11 is not at all the first thing that I've done today, right? So there's the way that they sometimes show up in class, which is assumed to be one thing when I, ethnographically, analytically, like research wise, I think it's something completely different, just that like you might just be tired. There is a whole thing about what they have the time for and what they are able to spend their time on, right? So one thing that often comes up is what football players are able to major in. There is usually a process of encouraging football players into certain majors because they are either quote unquote easier, because the professors have a relationship with the athletics department. So there's an understanding of if he needs to miss this class, it's going to be fine. If he doesn't turn his assignment, it'll be fine. There's that aspect of it, which is, I think, harmful to the athletes because then that limits what they're able to do. That might not be the major that they want to major in, right? But they're encouraged into it because it's easier for their schedule. So I think that then impacts their career opportunities post graduation and post football, right? If they're in a major that they didn't really sign up for, they don't really know what it is. Graduation rates are different for athletes, right? Because I think that it is a completely different experience to be a college athlete than it is to just be a college student. You have a full-time job on top of being a student. And so athletes don't graduate at the same rates usually as the other students that are in a classroom. So then that, of course, also impacts their ability to find jobs after, to be in a sustainable career after. There are ways that I like one that I think I reference it in the book, but it's definitely something that shows up frequently in my classes now that I teach. And it has since I've been a teacher, even as a TA. Football and basketball teams are often heavily surveilled. And I think that there is a racialized aspect to this, right? So the way that it shows up for the students that I often teach now is that they have class checkers, right, who will come to the classes to make sure that if you have basketball and football players in your class, and this is men and women, if you have basketball players and football players in your class, these class checkers from athletics will show up to make sure that the students show up to class. And the thing that I am always saying back to these specific athletes is to ask, do you realize that it's only these two teams that they have class checkers for, right? So these are the two teams on campus that are overwhelmingly Black, right? Like demographic wise, but they're the only teams that have these class checkers that will show up. So there's something that's going on there with surveillance and control and disciplining of of where your body is when it needs to be there, right? So there are all of these ways. I mean, like I can go on and on, but there are all of these ways that showing up as a Black athlete uh, on a historically white campus, one, just the demographics of it, of being in that experience of like, oh, I've never been in a class where I'm the only Black student, right? Like depending on where they come from high school, I've never been in a class where I'm the only Black student. I've never been introduced to this major before. Anthropology, I was introduced to it as an undergrad, right? Like, so you don't know what it is. You don't know what you don't know until you don't know it, right? So you show up and you don't know even what the majors are. You don't know what the opportunities or the potential opportunities are for you. There's a whole hidden curriculum that you just might not even know, right? Like, and that's not just an athlete experience. That happens to a lot of students on campus. But when you're magnifying all of these experiences with, most of my time is actually spent playing football. I'm really tired. My body hurts. I'm trying to figure out a new playbook. I just moved to a new place away from my mom, and I've got to figure out how to do laundry for the first time because that's just like being a college student too, right? Like all of that on top of people on this campus are assuming that I am not smart enough to be here. And now I have to deal with that. I have to deal with the fact that I'm walking through the town that my university is in, and people are looking at me differently because I am a larger Black man. I'm still young, but I'm a larger Black man walking through this city. And maybe the city that my university is in is also a predominantly white city, right? And so people are looking at me funny, making assumptions about me, but also stereotyping me and seeing me potentially as a threat just because of the body that I live in, which is the body that's necessary for football, right? Like there's all of these things that are happening at the same time for these guys, which is happening for all football players, but then you add the racialized aspect to it, and then it becomes a whole nother thing if you're talking about black players specifically, that I think is worth note, right? And like I said at the beginning of this, it's not that there are not other students on campus that are feeling elements of this, but I think that when you're a Black football player, it's all of the things all at the same time. And so how does someone who is still very young, right? Like if we think of how old these players are, some of them come to college when they're 17. It's like, how does like a 17-year-old deal with all of this? And the last thing I'll say to that, now it's not even just like a regular 17-year-old. It's like a famous 17-year-old, right? Who like potentially is making NIL money, who potentially has like a huge social media platform, who potentially people are gambling on and betting on. And so his performance in that game has financial ramifications for people who decide that they want to bet on college sports, right? Like there's this whole infrastructure now that's all based on like a relatively young Black, usually Black man who just got to college and like just wants to play football and is trying to go to class and is trying to graduate, right? Like at the very core of it, that's really all it is. And so I think that when you think of all of that together, it does make it a different experience when you're a Black football player, Black student on a historically white campus like Duke's, like UVA's, like Notre Dame's. So it's something that I've been able to see as a student, but then also as like a grad student, as a faculty member. I've been able to see it at all these different levels because of the universities that I've been affiliated with too.
Yeah, Tracy, as I listen to you talk, I now understand why your work is unique.
Thank you.
And it's yeah, and it's different. You approached this whole topic without a preformed perspective or orientation, and you were approaching it at the same time in your life course as the athletes were approaching it, and you were approaching it as a Black woman and a black person in the same contexts that the Black athletes were approaching it. So what you were doing, and I want to say this to the students who are listening, what you were doing is you were asking questions from, in a sense, your perspective as a student, being informed by anthropology a little bit, as you got into your coursework. So you knew that you were in a unique position. You were like that explorer in that tribe in on the Amazon, asking all of these questions that everybody back home were also asking. So what I'm saying here is that the students who are listening, the questions you are asking sometimes are very good questions, and they haven't been asked in that way before. So basically, when you combined that experience with your anthropology, And now Jeff and I are both trained in sociology, although
Yeah.
At Notre Dame, when I was there as a graduate student, it was sociology and anthropology. So
Yeah.
I got a little bit of that.
I should also
But
say that I was an anthro undergrad. And just like
okay.
Tracy, I discovered anthropology in college.
Yeah, so now well, probably all three of us could talk about this, but you have a better, I think, a better grip on it maybe than Jeff and I, who have passed by some of this in the past. What is the difference between the concepts and methodological approaches that you use as an anthropologist versus the concepts and perspectives we use as sociologists that make your approach a little bit different than a lot of the sociology of sport that's covered in the sports and society textbook?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I really appreciate that reading of me and also the work, right? Because I appreciate that comes through. And even with the answer that I gave to the first question, like, yeah, like I'm coming at this completely completely neutral with no like this is my favorite team. I love the sport. I want, like I love everything about this. And so I'm writing from that. That's really not where I'm coming from. I am coming from a place though now I can say, because I've done it for so long, like, I'm deeply invested in the players themselves. I'm not as invested in the sport. I'm not as invested in the institution itself, right? Like the institution of college sport or football, right? Like that's not really what's motivating me. It's really what are the experiences of these players and how can we potentially make it better for them, right? And I think that all of this came, like you alluded to, all of this came from me being a student and noticing the people that were around me. But then as I went through anthropology, I think that anthro and sociology, we call them like we're intellectual cousins, right? Like they're very similar theoretically. The thing that I appreciate and what drew me more to anthropology as a grad student, right, because I could have chosen between the two fields, was I really appreciate the ethnographic method, right? And that's something that anthropologists, if you're a culture anthropologist, you are usually an ethnographer. They usually go hand in hand, at least in grad school, and then you can start to do different things. But if you're in culture anthropology, there's usually at least a year built into your grad school program where you spend time with the people that you're interested in and you learn from them. And that was something that I was realizing I had kind of already been doing as an undergraduate, right? Like I didn't have the words for it. I didn't really know what was going on. But as I learned more about anthropology and ethnography, I was realizing that this thing that I was doing of paying attention to the people around me, to the situations around me, to asking questions about like, why? Like, what, how did we get here? Like, what is the point of this? Like, why isn't anybody questioning that this is the way that it is? How are you feeling? Like, how did you get here? Like asking those questions of my friends. Um, I was realizing that was the start of me being an ethnographer. And so I was drawn to anthropology mostly because of ethnography. And so that's part of the thing that I think separates anthropology and sociology. It doesn't always have to, because there are sociologists who are ethnographers as well, right? But the way that I think about anthropology and ethnography together is that ethnography, which can be, it's another one of those kind of jargony words, actually, but there are other ways that we can call it. Sometimes it's participant observation. The one that I like is deep hanging out, because I think it makes the most sense. Is that like you deeply hang out with the people that you are interested in writing about, the people that you're interested in learning more about. And for me, it's always about people, right? Like there are ethnographers who are interested in institutions. There are people who are interested in systems themselves. But usually ethnographers are interested in the people who make up those systems, those institutions. And I think that sometimes can be one of the differences between anthropology and sociology. Um, and so, as someone who's interested in how people got to where they are, why they're doing the things that they're doing, and how they're making sense of the world around them, I was like, oh, like ethnography is perfect, right? And then anthropology is going to help me potentially answer those questions, because anthropology is a discipline that historically has been interested in power and hierarchy. There's some like old school, like deeply rooted themes that anthropologists are really interested in. So race is one of them, gender is another, kinship, like relationships between people, food systems, right? Like there's certain things that anthropologists have historically been really interested in, but usually anthropologists, I have another colleague named Lee Baker who calls it, anthropologists usually study the out of the way other. So anthropologists are usually people who go outside, if you're in the States, who will go outside of the States and spend time with people in different places in the world and come back and write something. So I was doing something a little bit different because I was working more in a way that I was at home, right? Like quote unquote at home in the US. Um, but there was something really interesting to me about learning from people about how they were theorizing their own lives to say that you're the expert, right? Like, and actually, like, this is perfect for what it is that I do. I've never played football. I don't know what that is like. I don't ever want to play football. That is not an experience that I think I would enjoy. I ever want to try. Like, that's not for me, right? So there's certain things that football players like. Actually, there's a lot of things even now that football players teach me all the time about what their lives are like, what their experiences are like, what it's like to play, what it feels like to play, what it feels like to wear all of that equipment. That was something that was really interesting to me at the beginning of like, what is it like to like I imagine that equipment is really heavy and like you have a helmet on and it messes with your peripheral vision and like you have all this stuff on. But then like people are running at you and you have to I mean, to me, I would run away, but they're like running towards these people that are running at them, right? Like, so what's that like? Like what makes you want to do that? Like so asking those types of questions. Um but then also, like, I'm not a man. I didn't grow up in a man's body. I didn't grow up in the body that they grew up in, even as a woman, right? So there's a lot of like gendered gender and sex stuff that comes up. There's a lot of like embodiment stuff that comes up that I cannot ever experience and I won't ever know for myself. And they know, right? They've thought about it, they've experienced it, they've lived it, and they theorize it. Whether or not they're theorizing it in the words that I would use as an anthropologist, I think that people are always theorizing their lives consistently, all the time. Sometimes it might take you a couple years to reflect on something of like, ooh, that was a bad idea. Should not have done that. Should have gone about that differently, right? Like we all have those moments where we take a minute and like we need to reflect. But I think people are always theorizing and thinking through their own decisions, their own opinions, why they're doing what it is that they're doing, whether or not that rises to like consciousness and they're talking about it, right? And so as an anthropologist, that's the way that I think of what my job is. And that's what I really like about being an anthropologist and an ethnographer is that I get to spend time with people, spend a ton of time with people. And like I alluded to in grad school, you spend at least a year with the people that you're working with. So spend at least a year just kind of like following people around. Some of it is interview based, but I always tell students like people lie. So you can interview them, but then you need to follow that up by just following them around for like a week or two and see if it matches up with what they said, right? So spending time with them, seeing who they talk to, what do they eat, where do they go, what do they do for fun, what is really interesting to them, what annoys them. When something good happens, who do they call? When something bad happens, who do they call? Right? Why did they choose to wear that over that? Why did they choose this sport over that sport? That's something else that matters for my work, right? So these are all things that I can get at much easier if I'm just like around you a lot all the time. And I think that then I can use the tools of anthropology, like the theoretical tools of anthropology, to make to me like a cohesive argument about um how Black players are interacting with the college football system, right? How I think that the college football system is exploitative, and I have these data points, which are ethnographic data points, to prove that. Who is around to help Black players navigate this now, what I'm analyzing as exploitative system, right? What is their reasoning for even participating in this, right? Like these are all questions that I can have and I can answer them, in my opinion, just because of how I've been trained and how I think about the questions that I'm thinking about. I can now answer them much easier because I've spent time with you. And it's not just you. I've spent time with like a bunch of different people. I've collected a bunch of data. I'm able to see kind of in my head like a map of how all of this information fits together. And then I can tell a story. And I like telling stories about people, about people's lives, about certain situations. And then the last thing I'll say to that too is that ethnography is, of course, context specific, right? So it means that at that time, with those players at the universities that I was at, that's what I wrote about, right? But if I were to do if I were to do the ethnographic work that's in my book, if I were to do that again now in 2026, I think I would write a completely different book because times are different, the people are different. I might pick up on different things, right? Different things might be interesting to me. They might tell me different things, which might lead me down a whole different rabbit hole than the one that I went through in the first book. So that's another thing that I actually really appreciate. Some people get annoyed by that with ethnography of like, it can't be repeated. It's so context specific. It's so ethnographer specific. And I think that, yeah, it is. And I actually really like that because that means that y'all could do the exact same work and it would be a different book. I could redo the same work 10 years later and I think it would be a different book. I may pick up on the same similar things, but it wouldn't be the exact same. But because it's so context specific, the fact that, like, as an example, NIL has happened since I wrote my book, it would be a whole different book because now there's a whole different element to how players are interacting with the system itself. And so being an ethnographer and being an anthropologist allows me to think about it in this way. But this all started with me like just paying attention to campus, what was happening on campus, how people at Duke as an undergrad cared so much about basketball and didn't really care about football. And so what does that mean for the people that play football, right? Like that was what was really getting me interested here. And so then it evolved to like, oh, I can do something with this. I can be an ethnographer. I can I can make this a career by like people watching and talking to people, right? And just like being in new places and trying to see how it works and how people ended up there. That's what I think my job is now, and I actually really think that's fun.
Yeah, and from an ethnographic perspective here, the first time I came across you was at a North American Society for the Sociology of Sport conference,
Yeah.
and I think you were at Notre Dame at the time, but
Mhm.
and you were presenting a paper, and it was on mothers.
Yeah.
Now this fits with your anthropological perspective and the whole notion of kinship and how
Yeah.
kinship serves as a platform or a context through which you deal with the rest of your life
Yeah.
and make sense of it. And you were talking about the mothers of football players, and I had not thought of that
Yeah.
at all in the past. And maybe as a male, maybe as a white male, but you were raising a question that I immediately saw as important. You know,
Mhm.
what is happening in the lives of these Black men playing football, and how are they, like you used the word navigate, how do they navigate this? And you were saying that mothers help them navigate. So
Mhm.
t- tell us a little bit about that. You know, what is that relationship between a Black athlete, especially a football player, but
Mhm.
other sports as well, and their mothers?
Mhm. I love to talk about Black football moms because I will say that since the book has come out, one of the chapters in my book is all about moms.
Right.
And since the book has come out, this is the thing, like it's the chapter that has gotten the most excitement around it. Like people ask me about it the most. And actually it's the one chapter that players who have read the book are like, oh, 100%. Like they agree and they can like recognize the things that are going on in the rest of the book as well. But the moms chapter, they're like, oh, my mom said that to me too. Oh, my mom acts just like this. Oh, they'll give me extra stories. Or like, if you could rewrite this, like add this about my mom. I'm like, well, the book is written. But I really appreciate that you were adding, context to this. It's the most exciting chapter to me. I think part of it is because, as you alluded to, Jay, it's something that people don't usually. It's a group of people, and I think the way that I'm talking about it too. It's a group of people who are often not getting a lot of shine in this world, like in this football world, and it's because football is a hyper masculine, um, predominantly male sport, right? And it's not like I think hyper masculine and hegemonic masculinity, like the way that those two things work with football is one thing, but then also just the fact that there are so many men around in the sport is, I think it's something separate. And so it's a sport that's just like, there's just boys and men and just like guys all around and like what that means, right? And so for me as an ethnographer, something that kept coming up was when I was spending time with these players, their moms would always come up. And I wasn't bringing them up, right? Like I didn't say anything about them. I was interested in families, right? Like just in family dynamics, and like I said, like who is helping you get through the day. That was something that was really driving my interest in this project. But I wasn't asking specific questions about specific people. And so when players kept alluding to their moms, and I think some of this came into the book. Like there was a player who I had asked why he wore the jersey number that he wore. And just like offhand, he was like, "Oh, like they randomly gave me this number when I came to college. It's not the number that I would have chosen, but it's the year that my mom was born, so I decided to keep it." It's like, oh, that's like a fascinating connection of like you could have asked for a different number. You could have asked for your original number from high school, but you recognize the connection to your mom, so you kept the number, and so he played in that number all 4 years, and then I think he kept it in the NFL when he went too, right? I was like, oh, that's like an interesting thing. I'll see a player walking across campus and we're going to go eat lunch. And because that was something I ate a lot of meals with these football players. So we're going to go eat lunch. And as he walks up to me, he's getting off a FaceTime. I'm like, oh, who are you talking to? He's like, oh, it was my mom. Like, I just, like as I walk between classes, I talk to her and it's on FaceTime because she wants to see my face. And so I just like have her on and I walk around campus. I'm like, okay, interesting. I'm like, oh, like I really like this outfit that you're wearing today. Like, where'd you get it from? He's like, I don't know. You'd have to ask my mom. She bought it for me. It's like, your mother's still buying you clothes? Like, you're 22. Like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, she knows my size. She knows what I like. She knows where to buy it. And so anytime she comes to a game, she'll just like bring me stuff, right? So it was like those ways that players were just like bringing up these women all the time. I was like, oh, there's something going on here. And as an ethnographer, that's what you pay attention to, right? Is that it's not, I'm interested in certain questions, but if someone consistently brings something up, or if it's a theme that keeps coming up, you kind of follow it. And the way that I frame the moms in the book as being so important is that part of it is they are the people who are helping these players get through the day, right? Like these small moments that I just referenced are ways that like these players are living through. I don't think I can reiterate it enough. Like playing football is hard. It's dangerous. It's violent. It takes a lot out of you, like physically. It does a lot to your body. But then again, like you're a student, and so you're having to deal with like the time management of all of that. You're moved away from home for the first time. You're having to navigate all of that, right? So these moms are sometimes people who are just kind of, not kind of, who are there performing a certain type of labor to help their sons through just the daily grind that's required for this, right? But then when you're adding on the fact that they're Black players and Black moms, there's a racialized aspect to this, of what does it mean to mother someone who is living through a dangerous and violent sport and is also living in a dangerous and violent world outside of that sport. Right. And that is something that moms are having to deal with at the same time, like having to watch, because they would always show up to the games. These moms that I'm talking about, one, they were married, so they would show up with their husbands, and the husbands were usually the fathers of the football players. So it's not that these were single moms at all. The moms would show up to every game. They would be there all the time. So they're incredibly present in their sons' lives, but a lot of them couldn't watch the games because they would get too nervous watching them play. So on one hand, you're holding, I want to be present for my son, but I'm really nervous about watching him play the sport. And on the other hand, you're holding, I want to be present for my son and I want him to tell me about his day and I want to be there for him. But I'm really nervous that he might tell me that he got stopped by the police on the way to campus today. Or he might tell me that he was stopped in a store and somebody thought that he was stealing something and he had to deal with that. Or he might tell me, he might tell me that he's in a store trying to buy clothes and he's too big to buy any of the clothes in the store. Now I got to figure out how to clothe this, he's my child, but he's also an adult, right? Like I've got to figure out how to clothe this adult who's massive, because he can't just walk into a store and buy clothes. But like there are all these ways that these moms are holding all of this stuff at the same time. And again, on top of that, they are Black women living in an anti-Black US, right? Like, so they're also dealing with what it means to be women, what it means to be Black, what it means to live in a country that sees both of those things and demonizes both of those things at the same time now. And then they are the mothers of people who are also going through something similar, right? So there's all of these, again, like I think the way that I think through the work that I do and the people that I work with, again, is that not that these are unique experiences, that other people are not going through similar things, but there's something that happens when you combine all of these things at the same time in the same person. And now they're all in a family. So it's a player who's going through all of these experiences and a mom that's going through all of these experiences. And she's married to a man who also might have gone through all the same stuff because he probably played football too. Because let's be real, football is a family sport, right? And the other thing that often came up was players started to play because of their dads who played, because of their brothers who played, because of their uncles who played. So it's not that this is a singular experience even within the family of having to deal with football. It's like they got into this for a reason. And so all of the ways that those experiences matter for these Black women who are just like trying to be there for their sons and take care of them and make sure that they are living their lives to the fullest and trying to make sure that they are recognizing them not just as football players, but as like people, like young people living in the world who hopefully will, be okay once they graduate. hopefully will have a job, hopefully won't have both their knees blown out, hopefully if they want it, will, have a family of their own and will live on their own, right? Like that's what they're hoping for them because that's usually what parents do. That's usually what guardians do. But these moms are at such a unique intersection because of what their sons are going through and then also what they're going through at the same time. That I thought it was relevant to point them out because they are so hyper visible in this space. Like they are around all of the time. The players are talking about them all the time. Coaches are incredibly aware of them all the time. But they don't get a lot of shine. People don't really like to reference them. They usually get a spot on Mother's Day, like ESPN will do it, and usually college teams will have some type of, I don't know, now it's a graphic on Instagram, like thanks to the moms, right? Like that's the one day that you will usually hear something about moms. But what I try to argue is that like actually without the moms, the whole thing would implode. Like football would go away if the moms weren't around. And it's because they're the driving force behind it. And they're the ones that get the players there and keep them going. And I think that they deserved at least a chapter in my book. But there's new stuff that's coming eventually that will be about moms because I think that they're worth more than a chapter. How about that?
That's fantastic. Actually, I actually want to follow up on that and this whole idea of care labor that you talk about, because like I said, I think I said, I did work in the student athletic center with football players. They never talked about their moms to me. Like I got to know these guys, but or they might have, but it wasn't like a big theme. I was really aware of how exploitive that space was of those kids. I actually I couldn't take it, to be totally honest. I couldn't be a part of the way these kids were exploited. I remember one guy in particular, he was from St. Louis, and he's one of these kids who's like, growing up, white people were on television. He didn't know any. He didn't know any white people until he got to USC, which is, I think, the profile of very similar to Duke, right? These elite private universities, big sports schools. And so now he doesn't this kid had no support there. And he got a lot of bad advice from adults that are supposed to be looking out for him, but they're looking out for themselves because that's their career in a highly competitive space. And so, that was really heartbreaking. So can you talk about the role of the mom's care labor within this institution that's very exploitive, right? And you have that term that I like, corporal concern, and maybe you could address that as well.
Yeah, for sure. The way so first of all, let me just say that yes, 100%, right? And I have seen what you're talking about at so many different levels across, since I was an undergrad, right? Like I've seen it in these different ways because of what I've had access to as a student who was friends with people, as a researcher who's just kind of there, now as a faculty member. And I think that it's a really interesting dynamic now that I have with students because people know what I do and know what I write about. And so sometimes they'll tell me a lot of stuff and then sometimes they're like, oh, you're going to write an expose about me. I'm like, no, I'm not, right? So it's an interesting thing now that I have with students sometimes. But that was a dynamic that was so present for me that I had to do something with it. And that's why I ended up writing a book about it, right? I think that especially when I teach grad students now, what I tell them when you're an ethnographer is part of it is you just have to be open to whatever. You have to be able to be surprised, right? You got to go with the flow because you don't know what's going to happen. You're spending a year somewhere with people that you don't know in a situation that is usually very new to you. So you have to be flexible and open to whatever. But it usually means that you are often surprised, right? There are certain questions that I was like, oh, this is gonna be so easy. I'm doing this research when Kaepernick is kneeling in the NFL and I'm writing about race in college football. I'm like, this book is going to write itself, right? I won't have to do anything. And that did not happen because people were not talking openly about their experiences as Black men in football. And I was fascinated by that, right? It was everything is set up for you to talk about this thing and you're not. And so the reason that I bring that up is because I am surprised that I actually ended up, technically it's a book about care, right? It's a book about Black men. It's a book about football. It's a book about the exploitative system that football is, right? But it's also a book about, it's really a book about care and the care relations that are invested in football players at different moments of the day, at different moments of their lives, at different moments of their careers, right? And the way that that kept coming up is exactly how you're talking about, Jeff, right? Of I was noticing that something was coming from these football programs of we are investing in you because we need you to play. And so we're investing in you as a player, which means that we care a lot about the reason that the term became corporeal concern is like a tag to the body, but I'm not using care because I'm trying to say that it's doing something different. To say that, like, we are really invested in your body being able to hold up to this sport. So we are going to invest a ton of resources into making sure that your body can keep going like the machine that it is. We are also going to invest a ton of resources to make sure that you remain eligible because that's what makes college different, right? Is like they have to be eligible as students in order to be players. And so there are a lot of academic resources that come towards these players as well because they need to remain eligible. There's tons of ways that this comes out from the football program itself, from athletics departments, from the NCAA, right? Because if the players decide that they don't want to play anymore, if the players can't play, the whole thing goes away. So you need to invest in the player and the players' bodies. And I call that corporeal concern because I think that it is exploitative, because I don't think that it is actually for the well, it's not for the player himself. It is for the coaches who need to make money. It's for the leagues or the conferences that need to make money. It's for the media conglomerates that need to make money. It's for the entire system that is making money off of these guys going out and playing on the field. That does not mean that when you are encouraged into a certain major, that is necessarily for your well-being. That's just because it's easier for them. It's easier for them to track you. It's easier for them to know the professors that you have. It's easier for them to know that you will probably have an easier time in that major than you will in others. The one that often comes up with that is engineering. It's really hard for football players to also be engineers. And so it's very rare to see someone who graduates with a degree in engineering as well as graduating as a football player. And that's across the board because the time schedules don't line up. So it's hard to organize. The labs are hard to get into the classes. It's a certain amount of academic and intellectual labor that's required for it, right? So like they usually don't even encourage players into it. That is not, all of that is to say that is not for the good of the player. That's for the good of the program. That's for the good of the coaches. And that is because they need football players. On the other side, what I'm talking about in the book is what I call kindred care, which is coming from Octavia Butler's Kindred. If you've read the book or seen the show, there's lots of iterations about it now. So people at least have some type of touch point with it. And it's coming from that to say that there's something different that's coming from moms, right? The ways that these moms are investing in these guys as players, but as people, right? Like they're their babies. They want their babies to be okay in the world. So there's something different that's coming from these moms who are like, did you get hurt? Yes. Okay. Like, how can we take care of that? Like, what do you need from me? Like, do you need me to come up to campus? Right? Like, there's all that. And also, like, let me cook you a home cooked meal before I go back home. So when you come into your apartment after the game, you already have food, and the food is available for you all week long because I know that you're getting tired of this food that the football program is giving you. Right. So, like, that's what the moms are doing because they want to make sure that they're okay. They're asking about their girlfriends. They're asking about this random tattoo that has now shown up on their body. They're asking them about the internship that they hopefully have signed up for, right? Did you interact with that contact that I gave you? Because my friend downtown, she knows about this job and she wants to get you. Did you call her, right? Like that's what a mom is doing. And I argue in the book that other Black players on the team are doing that similar type of care labor that the moms are doing because they recognize themselves in each other. So there's something really important about Black players being on a team together, being overrepresented on this team, right? Like where they're underrepresented on the college campus. They come together, they spend so much time together. They usually live together because roommates are usually paired up based on the team, right? When you come in as like each year that comes in is like a unique experience because they're all new to it together. Even if they don't play the same position, even if they came from different states, even if they had different like high school experiences, you show up brand new on a college campus all together and you spend a ton of time together and you're trying to figure it out together. And so there's the football aspect of trying to figure it out together, as well as the like campus part of trying to figure it out together. Like, what is this new experience we're all going through? And there's also the like real world, real life, like we are young Black men trying to walk through this world and figure it out, and we're doing it together. And so the ways that Black players see each other and recognize themselves in each other and help each other and care for each other and have what I argue are incredibly intimate relationships with each other, right? I think is something that is mirrored with moms, but I'm saying that it's usually completely different than the type of investment and concern and quote unquote care that's coming from football programs, that's coming from universities, because they care about their bodies and they care about them playing. Whereas a mom is going to care, and a mom and another Black player is going to care about you as a person, is going to care about you holistically, is going to care about you post you graduating from this institution. Because something that was definitely happening while I was doing research was football programs kind of did not care so much about what players did once they were no longer on the team, right? So like when you graduate, and it's not even like when you graduate, it's like when you finish your last season, which players actually have a lot to say about that because football is a fall sport. So when they finish their season, they might finish their season, let's say in December. Let's say they make it to a bowl game, and so they finish in December. That means they have a whole semester left where they're just like regular students on campus. And that's like a weird experience for a lot of athletes because not every athlete gets that whole semester of like not having to engage with the sport anymore. Um, and there was a really interesting moment where the team kind of broke with them, right? Because you're not a teammate anymore. You're not on this team. You are now about to graduate in a semester, and we have a whole new batch of people that are coming in. And once you graduate from here, actually, like we have no need to follow up with you or to know where you are unless you were in the league. Because if you're in the NFL, then that helps our stats to say that like we have X number of people in the league, we had X number of people who were drafted, who are now in upper management, right? Like there's a way that they are able to track the people who make it pro, and they like to track those people. But what about the other people who don't? And stats are telling us that 97% of football players, of D1 football players, are not going to be drafted, right? So what's happening with them? They are lost track of in a way by their football programs, in a way that a mom is never going to lose track of her son, right? And so there's a completely different type of investment that's coming from these football teams who are like, okay, once we get what we need out of you, hopefully we made it to a bowl game, hopefully we won. But once we're done with that, we got everything we needed. Good luck to you. Congratulations. See you never, right? Whereas a mom is like, no, I've been investing in you this whole time. And whether you're going to the league or not, we need to have a plan. And it's a we, right? We need to have a plan. And it's usually the other guys on the team too of like, okay, what are you doing? Who did you talk to? What is the opportunity for you? Is that something that I think I can do too? Were we in the same major as undergrads? And so like maybe we can kind of team up and do something. The guys will, I mean, the relationships that they have are like lovely because the guys will sometimes like live in the same city once they graduate, right? They'll stay near each other. They will be groomsmen in each other's weddings. They'll be godfathers to each other's children, right? Like they'll know each other's partners because usually they met each other in college. So there's like these groups of people who have known each other for a long period of time. They still have group chats that are going 10, 15, 20 years later with the guys that were on their team in a way that you just don't see reciprocated from the team itself, right? And so that difference in the relationships and the care and the time and the energy that's invested from these different people who are constantly coming up in players' lives, that's what I wrote a book about. And it ended up being a book about care. It ended up being a book about labor and the different forms of labor too. But it ended up being a book about care and who cares for Black players and the different ways that people do care for them, right? Because it's not all the same from all the people that they interact with on a daily basis. And I think that it's necessary to point that out because football programs will use that as a recruiting tactic. They will say things like, we will care for your son. You know, like we will we will help him grow into the man that you will see him to be. They will say that to guardians that will come on recruiting trips with them. But very easily, a coach could be hired away and would leave and take the entire coaching staff, which means that whatever that family was promised, like it's gone. It's gone to another team. They could decide not to play your son. And so even if they had all of these promises and he got the scholarship and he's there on campus, he's not playing. So now what is he going to do? Right? Like there are all these promises and supposed investments that are coming from the team. Another one, of course, is that like he starts playing and he gets injured. And so now he either has a game-ending injury, he has a season-ending injury, he has a career-ending injury, right? And once those things happen, all bets are off for the football team. Like they can choose what they want to do with that. but they don't have to usually honor anything if somebody is injured, because it's all about what can you do for me. You can't do anything for me if you can't play, right? And so like those are all dynamics that I think are really important to consistently think through as players are having to interact with these different people and having to navigate or tackle these different systems. Um, and so I think that there is something completely different that's coming from moms and other players than what's coming from coaches or their schools. And so that's why I came up with these two different terms, right? Because I think that it's a tangible way to think through people who care about your body and people who care about you, and what that feels like on these different ends of the spectrum.
Definitely. Yeah, I wish we could follow this session up with someone who would talk about Black women in
Mm-hmm.
basketball, for
Yeah.
example, in a similar way. Are the dynamics similar for the Black women as for the Black men?
Right.
And I don't know if you've come across that just in terms of your experience, apart from your formal research, but I suspect that there's some interesting differences here.
Mhm, mhm. I suspect the same, and that's, like, I think that's something that as an anthropologist, again, like, I really appreciate about what it is that I do, but is limiting in a way, right? Is that, like, as an anthropologist, I am, like, very focused on a certain group of people. So my work has always been about Black college football players, about Black football players at any level, right? That doesn't mean that I'm not aware of what's happening in other
Right.
sports, or with other people who are playing. And actually, what I really appreciate is like talking about the book means that people come up to me and tell me about their experiences on their college campuses or their experiences playing sports, or what they've seen or what they've noticed. And so, just from that, like I know that there's a completely different experience for Black women who are athletes. I know there's a different experience for women who are athletes, right? But something that I really appreciate about that part of the work that I get to do of getting to interact with other people is that like students will come up to me and tell me about their experiences and how they're able to relate to the book. And what I found at this point, I've probably visited like 15 different universities to be able to talk about the book. And it's women rowers who will come up to me most frequently and say that they recognize themselves in the book. And rowers are usually white women too, right? And so there's a way that there's something about the way that I'm talking about like investment in bodies and like only caring about your body and like making sure that your body is good enough to perform for us, that rowers are really relating to. And I find that really interesting, right? Because I would have assumed that that would have been a completely different, like you're a woman, you're playing a different sport, like you're with water, you're a different time of year, right? Like all the things about this seem to be different, but there's something really cohesive about it. And so that's what I appreciate about anthropology, is to say that like I'm doing something very specific, right? Like with a very particular group of people. And I'm writing about a group of people that's then about a system. But that system is relatable, right? Like it can be extracted and looked at and turned around and thought about in these different ways, which means that athletes can see themselves in it, different athletes of different sports. It means that people who are not Black men can see themselves in it. It means that people who are not engaging in sports can see themselves in it, right? Because if you think about it, it's also a book about labor. So laborers in any way, I think, can see this element of like, who's caring for me? I'm being exploited by the system. Who is making money off of my labor? How am I being cared for? Like, how's my body being cared for if something happens to me, right? Like, these are all like, I don't think they're universal things, but they are things that don't only apply to football players, right? And so, again, like someone who does an ethnography, and there's great work that's coming out because Courtney Cox's book is similar to this, right? Like someone who's doing an ethnography with Black women who play basketball, there I'm sure are similar elements that are coming up here, right? But there's also a completely different thing that's happening based on the league that they're playing in, based on the time that she did the work, based on the specific people she talked to. Right? There's a lot that comes up to make it different but the same, and I think that that's really interesting and cool. And I think something that I try to get across to students too, right, is that like you can do something that is completely unique, but you're definitely part of a conversation, right? And usually you're not the first one to have done something. We are in the year 2026. You are not going to be the first to have done anything. You just need to find the other people and then be in conversation with them and figure out like what it is that y'all have in common and how can y'all be in community with the work that you're doing, what it is that you're trying to do with the work.
So we're coming up on our hour,
Yeah.
and I know Jay has more questions, and I have a lot more questions too. And I'm going to be a little
Part two.
greedy, and I'm going to ask one of my questions.
Okay.
So one of the things that I found really striking when I was in the student athletics center, I talked about the adults that are making their careers there. There was one person, who really stood out, of course, and that was the coach, Pete Carroll, who went on to be the coach at the Seattle Seahawks after he left USC, and he left USC a mess. And so he was very distant from me. I never met Pete Carroll. I never saw him in person, but I did see some of the men who had played football who came back to the institution I shouldn't say they came back to the institution. I don't know if they played at USC or not, but they played somewhere and they were working at USC, and some of the most exploitive were Black men in that space. And so I'm just can talk through like the system where we tend to think of racism in highly individualistic and moralistic terms in the United States. Oh, this is like white men that are exploiting young Black players. But it's not that simple. Can you talk more about when the men that played football in college come back and they become a part of the system? Because they intimately know what the players are experiencing, and yet
exactly
what does this system do there?
Yeah. So the way that I talk about them, and it's very offhand in the book, but the way that I talk about them and think about them is that they're actually sitting at like the Venn diagram intersection of kindred care and corporeal concern. Because exactly like you said, they're people who have gone through this experience themselves. So they know all of the stuff that I've been talking about. They know it intimately because they experienced it, right? And that could have been 10 years ago. That could have been 5 years ago. It could have been 25 years ago. It didn't matter when they played football, but it's something that they know because not just theoretically do they know it, but practically they know it, right? They know that experience. At the same time, they have now been hired back, in whatever position it is, they have now been hired back by an institution to be part of, we'll just call it the administration of like the football team, right? And being a part of that means that you are entering into a system, an institution that has a long history before you and will definitely have a long history after you, right? And that means that you're coming into a system that, if we're thinking about football, like college football as that system, a system that started out only being available to like well-off white men because college football started in the Ivy Leagues, right? So it was a sport that was only played for a decent amount of time, that was only played in a certain part of the country by white men of means because of the schools that they were affiliated with. Okay, we already have that in the history. It was also a sport that once it came to different parts of the country, it was not integrated because universities weren't integrated. Most institutions themselves were not integrated. So they were a part of a system that for a significant part of its beginnings did not allow other people to play. So we only have white men that are there. It's a sport that at the very, like for a decent amount of time, like was kind of lawless and ruleless. And so they were just kind of running around and sometimes literally killing each other because of the violence of the sport itself. So if we think about like the history of the sport and where it is now, that doesn't mean that where it is now is completely removed from where it started, right? So when you have whoever it is come back and they're hired back into the system, and again, on top of that, it's not removed from where it started, and it has grown exponentially, and it has been commercialized, and capitalism does its thing, and it is now what it is now, right? It's become big time. So it's a sport, it's a job, it's a career that involves a ton of money, that involves interacting with young people, right? Like these 17 to 21-year-old guys, if we're just talking about football. It involves something that has like racism and anti-Blackness and like a certain type of masculinity just built into it because of its foundations. And it's something that, again, like now there's a shit ton of money in. And so now we have to think about what it means that my job, my livelihood, like my individual livelihood, career, salary, the well-being of my family as a coach, as an administrator, is now wrapped up in how well you do on this field. Oh no, right? Like I'm part of the system now. I can understand what it is that you're doing, but I'm part of this system. And I want to keep my job and I want to keep the salary because guess what? I probably make at least $1 million a year. And so I would love for that to continue for as long as it can. And so that's the experience of somebody that comes back into the system, whether or not they played, whether or not, I mean, like that's one of it was something that coaches or that players said a lot about head coaches. They had they had a different respect for head coaches who had played college football because not all have. And so they had a completely different relationship to head coaches who had played versus head coaches who were just like in their minds thinking of it. Um, and they respected them in a different way because they thought that they were more manly to have played the game itself because of all of these values and dynamics that are wrapped up in the sport. Um, and so now, what does it mean that I am in this administrative coaching, usually role, in charge of disciplining, controlling, trying to manage a group of at least 100 players? Usually it's different positions, but at least 100 players all together. And my livelihood depends on them. And this is like a little 18-year-old who has just showed up and again is trying to figure out how to do laundry for the first time, and I've never lived away from home, and I don't know this campus, and so I get lost everywhere I go, and I just got here, so everyone who's here is actually, like, 3 times as big as me because they've had at least a season of working out and, like, being fed by this college program. Like, my entire livelihood is on the shoulders of this very young, naive, new person to this entire system, right? And that's like that is a disconnect, a schism, I don't know, like an issue that makes a lot of sense that it would have problems. But the coaches and administrators, that's the position that they're in. They're no longer that 18-year-old. They are now the however old they are, whose job depends on them. And so I think it, in a way, makes sense that these issues come up. Of we have coaches who are incredibly exploitative, who are not thinking through what it means, like the actual well-being of the player, who are not giving advice that is actually beneficial for them, but is more beneficial for themselves, right? Like we have these situations that come up. And then of course there's levels to it. You know, we hear about these massive programs who have issues with harassment and issues with abuse and um, where they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they promise to do, what their contracts say that they will do, right? Like we have all of these issues. And the system allows for it, right? Like that's it. It makes sense that that's the type of institution that college football specifically has now become, right? Because you have again all these dynamics happening at the same time, but it's all based on the labor and the experience and the participation of relatively young men who are new to this entire thing. And so there's a lot of responsibility on them in a system that depends on them, but is not actually working in their favor. And so when you have these coaches and administrators who come back, they're looking at them sideways again of like, well, what are you doing? Like, you need to get it together. Like, this depends on you. But I argue that there's not actually a system in place to help them navigate that well, to navigate that in a healthy way, to navigate that in a way that's beneficial for everyone that's part of this. But they're always going to be winners. And it's usually the system itself that wins. It's not the individual players who are a part of it.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Hey, Tracy, thanks so much for being here with us. As we've talked, I've had this a number of things going on in my head, but one of them is the advantages of diversity. You know, we have 3 different people here. Jeff and I come from different kinds of backgrounds, ethnically and age-wise. And we both come from different backgrounds than Tracy. And during this whole conversation, I have taken notes. I've been studying this stuff for 50 years. And Tracy, from her perspective, has opened up my eyes to things that I haven't seen and haven't thought of looking for because of my background and perspective. And so what that's done for me is reaffirmed the importance of diversity in our relationships. Many people are seeking a comfort through similarity and looking for people who are the same as they are, when in fact, meeting people who are different than we are, and that's one of the things that universities should be fostering, creates exciting interaction. It creates growth, and and it creates a knowledge of the world that will make not just our communities and our society better, but the world better. So it's the diversity that counts, and I think that this session has reemphasized that for me, and I hope that the students who are listening will see diversity in a different light here, and seek it out, because it's a growth experience when you have diverse experiences.
Thanks, Jay. Well said. Please, for our listeners, keep an eye out for our next exciting topical episode of the Sports and Society podcast. And you can join our conversation on the Sports and Society Discord server. An invite link will be available in the description. Thank you so much again.
Thanks y'all so much for having me.
Thanks, Tracy.